Your body remembers the marbles you used as a calendar, each a contemplation and appreciation for the day you'd been given, then tossed, the jar emptying over years. You bought 20 years too many. We take them in our pockets where we go, leave deposits of you in the celluloid narrative. In the Bay of Pigs, I launched a blue-eyed one in the glare. It fell into the sky twice.
Scar tissue. Open these old wounds, easy as memories. The indelicate album of crevices I'm left to care for. And listen to the sea of love, still spilling my blood, playing my bones, and singing its song of havoc so sweetly through broken skin.
Apparatus for N. Jones. War is not over when it's over. There are doors people kept closed to block out the cries and screams of desperation, but she opened hers wide, gave the women in our village cameras to record our daily lives, living under our men's rules. Through the apparatus' sharply focused eye, we slowly saw the darkness that ground our bodies down like meat. Our eyes blinded, our calloused hands and feet tied, tongues cut like those of our mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers. We were not even good enough to eat dirt. From the array of our photographs, we saw for the first time the daily battles we fought to survive, feed our children. From the scars in our throats, words began to bubble. For the first time in our lives, we dared to open a crack, the door that locked us in.
Good evening and welcome to our Voices in Verse Spring 2021 Poetry Book Launch. My name is Ashley Breckelmans and I am the Marketing Assistant at Signature Editions. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge that Signature Editions is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, as well as homeland of the Métis Nation. Thank you so much for your patience with some of our technical issues with this event. This evening, we are celebrating through very special poetry collections: Searching for Signal by Lori Cayer, The Trailer by James Scoles, and Primal Sketches by Caroline Wong. I don't think we could ask for a better way to end National Poetry Month. Our host for this evening is Charlene Diehl. Charlene is a writer, editor, and proud member of the Signature Editions family. She's the director of the Winnipeg International Writers Festival and has had a lifelong love affair with poetry. Please welcome Charlene.
Every time the Signature poets show up, it is a little happy dance for me because these are always beautiful books and distinctive, polished, insightful voices. So we have a delightful evening ahead of us, and I'm very excited to be in this chair. So our plan is I'm going to introduce each of these poets in turn, and they will read a segment from their book. And then once everyone's had a chance to share their work, we four will have a conversation, sort of far-ranging, wide-ranging, and kind of loosely structured. I always like to let the questions and ideas emerge from the writing and from the way these three extraordinary poets think and use language. So I want to start by saying the books themselves are absolutely lovely, and I will show them one at a time. So we're going to begin with Laurie Cayer, who is the most experienced of these three poets. This is her fifth book. Yes, Laurie is an award-winning poet, has several extraordinary collections to her credit. She's also a lovely reader and a really sensitive, insightful speaker about experience and the world. And this new book, Searching for Signal, is a stunning book. It even looks very special. So Laurie, will you give us a taste of this book, please? Please welcome Laurie Cayer.
Hi, everyone. Yes, with great thanks to Signature, to Karen for making the, pardon the Post-its, but she made the planets to be very shiny in relief against the front of the cover. And I just really love that sort of tactile feeling that they have. They're marbles, actually, the same as in that book trailer. So this book is, just quickly, it's an elegy to my father, who was a carpenter and a hunter, among many things. He was a great friendly guy, big talker, loved to visit and talk on many subjects. But the year that he became ill, he went uncharacteristically silent. He didn't share with us the experience that he was having, which completely surprised me. I was waiting for the special talk or some kind of insight from him, which really never did come. And as a poet, my natural inclination was to want to record this living act of his dying, because he was such an important person to me. But the book soon became two separate things, because I realized that to examine his life and death meant that I had to examine my own, and I had to go generations back to his parents and even the whole immigration of the French and Ukrainian that came to Canada, and the hardship and strife and poverty that they came from and that they continue to have here, and how that, I don't know, legacy of trauma passes down through generations, and each generation we kind of try to do better, and sometimes we win at that and sometimes we don't. Anyway, so here is, the book is a long poem, so each page is a poem in and of itself, so there's no titles. I'm just going to kind of burn through a few poems about him, one each about each of his parents, and then hopefully leave you hanging on a cliff edge just at the end. What do you say when I throw a wide net of talking, hoping to catch the scaled skin of something to hold? What do you think about all day? Now books, now movies have lost their meaning. Nothing, say, hours of your silence, non-reflective. Your workshop, our common hub, maple, lacquer, black oak, smell of sawdust, timber, propanol, terpenic, volatile compounds, incense, root, comfort, tinge of anxiety, smell of you to this day. Your mother, your dear sweet, 90 pounds of pin curl and scarf, toughest hen for miles, survival expert of potatoes and dill, old coats sewn into quilts, hard scrabble love of that particular man, him dead of hard living at 54. Lucky for you all, if you're honest. What you know of wood, multifarious steps toward an entire building, a set of kitchen cabinets, walnut and glass table for your mother. Not till your 60s did you lose 3 fingertips, miter cut, blood jumping crickets across the room. Your father, with 2 strikes, then 3, a lifetime, temporary jobs to make the smallest dollar, sucked from his pockets by booze. No one to pity him, his luck, his demon, his battering ram mother. All he ever wanted, reliable work, a quiet wife, unhungry children, and enough for the demon marching his blood. I'm scanning the data bank of your enterprises. Lifetime of diminishing investments. Houses split up into rentals, restaurant owner, building inspector, sudden earthworm farm in the basement, etc. And that quaint anecdote, passing by Lynn Lake on a hunting trip. Repossessed house bought on your card for $900. 12-hour drive one way to be landlord. The gambler's paradox had you blind to folly, hereditary, thistle-rooted to the suspect examples of the dead. Between hospital sleepings, you oversee the noisy builders upstairs, constructing your next place. Your fingers pick at the blanket, count out the nails. Suddenly, closer to never, I ask it. Ask if you know where you're going. Yes, you say, in the language of most certainly, your blue eye seeing it. So I'll just leave it there. Just a little bit of everything through the book.
Wow, thank you, Lori. Those poems are so powerful and assembled together. It is quite a journey. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Our next poet is James Scoles. James has lived and worked, sounds like, pretty much all over the world, and he is now digging some roots in Manitoba. He's teaching at the University of Winnipeg. Matter of fact, I think he's got a few students on this call, which is great. And he's sharing his writing. This book is a debut called The Trailer, also a beautiful book. And it has a very lively, unique voice. So please welcome James Scoles.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. The first poem I'm going to read is a sonnet, actually, and this was published in the Malahat Review, and I'd never written a sonnet before. In fact, I made the comment in a creative writing workshop many years ago. Aren't there enough sonnets in the world? Haven't there been enough great sonnets? And everyone it was like the record stopped. And everyone just sort of looked at me like, no, sorry, sonnets are important in the world. And so this one is called She Got My Heart. She got my heart and I got the sofa, her dresser, the kitchen table, 2 poorly put together pieces of furniture, Scrabble. All the books, mean looks, a freezer burnt old bottom feeder we meant to cook, bake into our not so sodden moments and memories. I joked, a whole little soul to help my broken soul heal. One eye big, wet and cold, the fish's, not hers, still follows me, it always will. And here's another sonnet. And I found a way to kind of make sonnets funny, at least to me. And whenever you say that, oh, this is supposed to be funny, that's the first sign of like a bad comedian. So she danced me sideways. She danced me sideways, then waltzed out of my place with this achy breaky heart half hanging out of an old fiddle case, humming a Chopin farewell for a laugh. So went our rumba. Our kitchen party dance machine fell from solid gold to dark and cold. Then our tango morphed into a rotten old mango the same day we found dry rot in our foxtrot. She couldn't quick step fast enough away. Our cha-cha went wah wah, as would my Macarena, making her mad with slide, hip hop, and jazz. Things just didn't jive. She liked my imitations. I've written a lot of sonnets and they have a sort of a theme, and this one is about classic television stars. You'll get to play along with one of the sonnets shortly. She liked my imitations of certain classic television stars, but hated some others. My Edith Bunker bombed, and Archie made me look like a meathead. But my George Jefferson jumped her battery, and even Mr. Cunningham had his hardware polished. She called my JJ Dynamite, but my Fonzie flopped faster than Gabe Cotter. My Elf sucked, but my Columbo was out of sight. Same with Radar, and cool that Kojak caught her off guard. Now, she wasn't into my Ted Knight as I'd liked, but a Jack Tripper Snicker made the effort worth it. I aim for the stars in heaven, even if my Mork from Mork brought us right back to earth. My acting teacher once told me my method was simply not acting very well. I don't own the role. She'd agree. This poem is a short poem published in the Winnipeg Free Press and featured in the Rites of Spring section last Saturday. And I want to thank Charlene Diehl, who's also the head honcho of the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, and also Ariel Gordon, who organized that, and Tamar Rubin, our colleague at Signature Editions, in her collection Tablet Fragments, which is amazing. Small town, big shine. Tough luck at this little box office. You know, the film has been shredded and the lights are dim. But see the usher still sweeping her light? Not looking for rule breakers, just wrinkles in the dark. Now here's the sonnet that you can play along with. There are 24 references to Canadian music legends, bands, and albums. And I'll point out a few of them to begin with. She was like a Canadian. She was like a Canadian music legend, not exactly Murray or McNeil, and certainly not as sweet. More Morissette-like, a Jordan Twain traveling the miles. Real sassy too, a platinum blonde in black velvet. We met at the Parachute Club. It was prismatic. She made me rise up, right up, up, up. She was a trooper, singing McLaughlin, a little like Luba, playing guitar in a mahogany rush. I told her, I'm your lover boy. You've got my street heart. Our Harlequin romance needs the honeymoon suite. She shook her head, said I had turned into a real true Cochrane. Heartless, jagged little pill, eh? All because of my great big seed-like mouth, our patio lanterns dimmed, and love, like a snowbird, went south. Okay, so a couple just real short poems, done with the sonnets, so we can move on from that. Forget I even mentioned that. They're 14-line poems that are not meant to be funny. They're meant to be serious. But My Baby's Waltz, this poem is a emulation of Theodore Rutke, who I consider one of my inspirations, one of my teachers. Most of my teachers are dead now, like Theodore Rutke and Elizabeth Bishop and so on, but they live on, and I try to keep them living on in my poetry. And so this is based off of My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Rutke, one of my favorite poems. The heat from her body used to make me dizzy. I hung on for dear life. Such loving wasn't easy. We romped, frames crooked, and got the trailer rockin', at least until our spook neighbors got to knockin'. The body, soldered to mine, was made for long sessions. We came together like sunshine and sea in love-making lessons. Grinder, groaner, and wailer, a world-class lover indeed, who waltzed out of my trailer and left me clinging to memories. And this final poem is called Traveling Thing, and it sort of unites the theme of my next collection, which is a collection of travel poetry called The Stone Roses of Sarajevo, and where the trailer took people and takes the reader on a journey into and out of and around the trailer. My next collection hopes to take the reader around the world to some of the places I've been. Traveling Thing. The lusty old traveling thing hasn't yet ruined to dust, hasn't yet taken its tail to another table. That old feeling still ruckles and shakes like an old train tightening up its schedule. Steel wheels making hot love with twin tracks, one steam-driven dream driving the beast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. That was exactly the energetic delivery I would have expected from these poems. Clever, funny, smart, but also, you know, a lot of heart. So thank you so much. That was a great reading. And our third poet tonight is Caroline Wong, who comes to us from another time zone. She lives in Burnaby, BC. And as you'll hear from her reading tonight, and you'll know more as you read the book yourself, she carries stories from China, her place of birth. She came to Canada as a teen. Her poetry is beautifully shaped and delicately expressed. And this is also a debut and a very assured one with another beautiful cover. Please welcome Caroline Wong.
Honored to be here, especially with James and Laurie, two award-winning poets. Yeah, like Charlene said, my stories are from all my travels to China. Also some stories from books I read and really moved me. So yeah, so I'll read some of them. Thanks. Yangtze, morning. From the door of her old home, she watched the river daily rise. Most of the people living forced out of the village, the century-old town, they died among the clouds. They fled carrying tools, beds, tables, chairs to the hastily built new town with no place for raising ducks and chickens, jangling 1,000 li east. At night, she dreamed the waters rising over the threshold, carrying out her bloated corpse, gibbons from red cliffs, the ceaseless howling, floating along with carcasses of pig, cow, deer, and other debris, while sampan lightly sailed down the river through the vanishing gorges, 10,000 peaks. Okay. This is another one about the river. Okay. Toxic waters. Driven from his village home by the killing river, the threat of forced termination, he, his wife, daughter, and unborn son lived on discarded plastic collected at the edge of the new town. He tried to grow onions and spinach in a patch of dirt around a utility pole, but the municipal police came, trampled the vegetables, and hauled him away. This poem comes from my walks. I live by a lake and I go down there quite often. Magic realism. Hummingbird windmills, sonic boom at subatomic range, zeroing in. Somewhere in the Himalayas, a rock loosens, a climber misses step, curses. Minuscule whirlwind barely disturbed the mass of tubular bow fuchsia, dripping in the aftermath of a drenching September rainfall. Days have passed since the last time I ventured out, except to harvest the last of string beans, fuzzy squashes, half-ripe tomatoes, split green sap oozing, nutrients for ubiquitous fruit flies, wasps, bumblebees, half-drunk, clumsy. Down by the lake, I miss the geese that has taken early flights south, driven by unseasoned cold. 3 families I watched last summer, raising brood so large in number, I fear how the parents could ever care for them, keep them all safe. My heart broke each time I tallied the slowly fletching, gosling, dwindling. Cars of distant honking, closing in. My autumn moon lifts up the perfect V of the onward flight, airing a miracle in perseverance and number. Okay. Footfalls. My footprints behind yours, through eye of the needle, daughter to mother to daughter to son, the steps I take, reverberating across centuries, the way encoded. Our lives concentric rains growing outward, lilies and roses nourished by sun and rain, the dark earth. We walk in shadow, our steps grow firmer, our footfalls louder, thunder across teeming valleys, deserts, echo through colonnaded halls and chambers. In our bellies, we carry the fire that fueled our forebears onward. In our vein, a river of stories and memories illuminates our ancient paths. Yeah, okay. That's it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. Oh, those poems are exquisite.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to all 3 of you. Those were, it's such an odd way to meet. I'd like to just, be able to breathe the same air as you, but I appreciate the way that you share the poems out so that we can hear them and feel them. So I'll actually ask Lori and James to unmute, or for Ashley to unmute you there. So I'm just going to start in the place that is haunting me now with these 3 readings in my ear. I wonder if you each would talk a little bit about your ideas about displacement, about being in place, being out of place, about travel, about movement. I see in all 3 of these collections a kind of sometimes straddling time, sometimes straddling countries, sometimes straddling generations. Is that too broad a question? Can I just toss that out there? Caroline, I'm going to ask you to start because you most explicitly write about, movement and travel and displacement.
I can say that like traveling, I do a lot of traveling, and this shows up in my poems. When I think about it, it's just some kind of it's rooted in my immigration background. Like my father and my father, they both immigrated from China when they were very young. And so I think all these journeys are really signify that my search for something is lost in my uprooting, in the process of uprooting, like childhood, home, or identity, a place to belong to. And on another level, I think it's also my sort of longing to go back to a childhood landscape. Like I grew up I was born in a village in China, and our village was surrounded by hills and orchards and rice paddies, rivers and streams. So because I had to leave it so abruptly when I was a child, so this longing to go back to that elemental world is always there with me. And that's how I didn't know so many journeys in my poems until somebody asked me a question about it. And I guess that's the way I think. Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. It also is so interesting when you start gathering poems together and realize that there are certain things that perplex you or that have your imagination and that are part of how you understand your life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're
Lori, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. You know, the idea of movement and travel is not quite the thing with me, because I'm part of a generation where I've been rooted here solidly my whole life. And so was my dad, actually. But it's not travel on purpose, really, for my ancestors. It was travel by necessity. It was immigration. And the journeys of either side of the family were quite different from one another. The French came here way, way long ago, in the 1600s. I can trace it all the way back to the 1600s. So they had quite a lot of variety of experiences, but it was the people that came to Manitoba that had to kind of start all over again as pioneers in the late 1800s. And the Ukrainians came here, of course, because of being displaced where they were at. The country of Ukraine wasn't even a country at the time. They were reduced to just being a language in a place they didn't belong. So they thought coming here was the better option. And for them, maybe for some Ukrainians, it was a different experience. But for my family, it was kind of living the very same way they had lived in Europe, but they were here in the same type of weather, on the same type of dirt, and so on. I think of my dad's place as the forest, as outside, because that's where he always wanted to be, was outside doing things.
That's lovely. I hear in your reading, and as I kind of wander through the poems in your book, I hear another kind of travel or journey, which is your journey as the daughter, coming to a different place in your life after the loss of a parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and his journey out of life too, because really that was the book initially. You know, that sort of half of the book was exactly the book for a long time. It just sat in my desk, being this record of how he departed, you know, his particular way of doing that task. And I guess everybody does it differently, you know. And yeah, I mean, we took that journey with him, but I don't know. It was another journey for him. He lamented frequently about not being able to be outside. That was probably the worst thing for him, was having to be indoors for him.
That's fascinating. It's quite a portrait that you make, and it's also a beautiful portrait of yourself as a person witnessing. So we might circle back to that.
You know, Lori, years ago, I read a story in Prairie Fire, and the title of the story was, it was a piece of creative nonfiction, and it had won one of the awards, and I think it was called "Opening the Grief Case." And I thought, what a clever title, you know, but that came to mind when I read your collection. And just that, you know, the idea of traveling from a place, I mean, I can really appreciate a place of grief, but also a place of stability, and how grief and it affects your stability, right? And how that transience, you're constantly traveling, and it's not a 6 month, it's not a 2 month, it's a circular pattern that never really ends. And I really, really, appreciate that, how you captured that. And getting moving on to Caroline too, like how you talked about China and your journey back to China. 20 years ago next month, I was in China, and it was not that long after Tiananmen Square, and I went to Tiananmen Square and I sat down in the square and I had a beer, and I thought, well, this would be kind of cool. I'll have a beer and I'll kind of commemorate in my own way. And next thing I know, I was picked up and dragged into an alley and said, get on your way. And things were removed from me, and papers and stuff were, and I realized I'm not, that's not, you don't go to these places. And so everywhere that you go where change has been so, you know, immense, you find, I think, poetry. And that's where the trailer, coming back to bringing this back around, like, and also traveling, and what Carolyn said about sort of re-identifying with your younger nature or the person you were. I got exposed to travel as a young person, and I was grateful for that. My parents really enriched that and encouraged that. And same with my brother John and my older siblings, and Don and Ernie, who traveled a lot before me. And I really, really looked up to them and tried to carry that forward, no matter how challenging it was. But those states, whether it be grief, return to the past, or the trailer to a place where you've experienced something, they're no different than going to a new country, because you earn this place when you travel to it, whether it's grief or other things. So I'm fascinated by both of your collections, because I think you really capture them so well.
And you just carefully dodged the question yourself. So talk
Yeah,
to me a little bit about
that was on purpose.
placement and placement. One of the things that, I mean, it strikes me that that a trailer is not is an impermanent home in a way. So I think one of the things I feel reading your collection, James, is there's a sort of a skittishness almost, or a kind of a motion all the way through that won't quite sit still. It's partly the wit, and it's partly the million references, but there's also something about, I don't know, the stability and instability that interests me about something in the core of your book. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I want people to kind of take away from the collection, that there's humor and joy, and there's all these other things that I'm hoping people can identify with, as with heartbreak on a much larger level. And also that idea that, because I've always felt that poetry is the most intimate road between writer and reader. And so I want to invite the reader into that world without perhaps giving up a lot more than I need to. And maybe that's kind of like, you know what, come and drive by the trailer park, drive in the trailer park and around, but I'm not necessarily going to let you into the home a whole lot. You're going to have to get my point of view of it. Does that sort of make sense, Charlene?
I think you invite us into that trailer quite a bit, actually.
I guess I do.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
But I think, I guess it's that idea of the precariousness, of living on the edge, not only of a city, but of stability itself. That things are never quite, that it's a balance between a slow, what is that one poem I have? A balance between a unstable ground and a slow, steady landslide.
Right. That's a pretty good description when you get right down to it. I just wanted to move a little bit from that idea to one of the things that really strikes me about, I guess, about all great poetry, but about these three books in particular, because they're the ones that are in my mind right now, is the way that each of you use a lot of precision in your images and moments. I remember a poetry critic years and years ago said, a poem is an act of attention. I thought that was such a nice kind of compact way of saying that there's a way that a poet pays attention to a moment, a feel, a smell, a texture. And I thought so often as I was reading each of these books, I just paused for a second because I just wanted to live for a second in those intense, precise moments. And it made me think, a few days ago, I heard an artist say they thought that by going very particular, you have a better chance of reaching a universal or a general. There's sort of get to the general through the specific. So I felt in my reading that each of you offers such precise, specific sensory moments. And I wondered if you would just talk a little bit about, I mean, I know you all know how to do it. What I'm curious about is when you're creating these moments in a poem, do you start with that moment, or do you find it in there as you're trying to find the shape for the whole poem?
I think like what you just get into it. I think when I write, usually the first line will take me into the poem, and it just, and the words just came, and I just write down whatever comes to my mind. It's not a controlled process. It's almost like, I guess, inspirations or whatever, but you get into that moment and the words just came, and then the images and all that. I don't know. That's what I found. Yeah, that's why I find I like poetry like that. It's so like, it comes from deep inside. I can't control it. It just.
But do you find, Carolyn, that you're changing it and changing it and changing it as you go along? As each time you come back and look at it, you think of, you change it, or do you tend to leave it the way it was first written?
I usually I go back to it and maybe change the words, that the line, that the how you arrange the lines and that, and yeah, I do go back to it.
How about you, Laurie?
Well, it seems like a question about craft to me, because what I've always thought of myself as being this extremely verbose, wordy poet, and I had to always get everything in every poem. It's like an extra whole stanza had to be there because that's what happened that day. And it's taken me literally 20 years of learning to slash and burn through my own work to come down to that kind of specificity, because that's the kind of poetry I want to read, is the kind that is very much punches on the page and as brief as possible to move the reader with as few words as possible. But I admire in particular Jen Still for her stunning ability to leave one word on the line and have you need to shut the book for a minute. You don't need whole sentences all the time. And so yeah, for me, it's just been this endless journey to become able to be brief, to say what I need to say in a much more succinct way. I like that better. It feels better to me.
I was struck when I was reading your book, Laurie, about what feels almost like a transparency on the page. There's so much space and quiet right on the page, in the way that you use line and space. There's a lot of quiet and stillness in these pieces.
It very much was deliberate. Yeah, wanting to be brief with the words, but also to have that airy space, which I was thinking in terms of, just how a person becomes, as they're dying, become reduced just to breathing. And then you're waiting as this person is just finishing breathing. And it was breath space that I was thinking about. But when I was writing the history type of poems, that was a kind of a whole different matter, because then I had this much information, and it took quite a lot of slashing and burning to bring it down to something that wasn't prose. That's always the key for me, is to make sure it is not prose, that I've kicked out all the prose and just leave behind the poetry.
You kick out the prose.
Kick it out.
Sometimes it's a bit hard to tell the difference between those two, but I guess it's partly the intensity and the voice that you want then, Laurie.
Yeah.
James.
And that sort of that metaphor of slash and burn and deforestation, right? Like the rainforest has this canopy and it catches everything and it's lush and rich, and sometimes you gotta not that we want to aim for that, obviously, but you have to move the vines aside sometimes. And a lot of my poems were over the years have been overwrought, and I can really appreciate that, like years of working in that. And I'm starting to discover just now, in my late 20s. I got a few laughs there. That's good. But W.H. Auden, I keep always going back to this definition of poetry as memorable speech. You want it to be remembered and it to be memorable. I shouldn't say that remembered, but memorable. And also Rita Dove, the idea that if it doesn't sing, it's not a poem. And so that part has always stuck with me. And the Japanese have a saying, like I've written lots, the Japanese have a saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8 times. Well, I have a saying, fall down 747 times, stand up 632. And that actually includes the exchange rate. So that's, it's about draft and draft and draft and draft. And Sue Goyette, who's one of my big inspirations, and I'm a huge fan of Sue Goyette, she gave a great talk at the U of W about 8 years ago now. And she said that part of the key to writing is when you sit down to write, that you're writing at the 7th draft.
It's there.
Okay, I just wondering.
You're writing at the 7th draft?
Yeah, when you sit down, you're actually starting at the 7th draft. That is the key. And I'm like, well, I still start at the 1st draft. So I know I'm a long ways from Sue Goyette material, but that's pretty cool to think that, that you're that prepared, you're that experienced, you're that ready. When you sit down, you're at the 7th draft.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I know we're soon going to run out of time, but I'm curious about the way each of you senses your own voice in your writing, because you all have a very distinctive voice, and you're all sort of telling stories that are witnessing in important ways something that is true to your own experience. So I feel as a reader, like I get to meet you. I get to meet you as you make a certain kind of path. What I'm curious about is when you are embedded in that task of sharing a story, sharing a way of seeing, do you feel like you, or do you feel like you've assumed a speaker or a kind of a persona that lets you say the thing you want to say? This is me in my sociology hat. James, can you start?
Yeah, when I teach classes in creative writing 1st and 2nd year, I encourage my students to do something that for years I refused to do, and that was emulate the greats. And so I get them to take a poem, not the greats necessarily, but a poem that they really like, a poem that has a structure, and then they fill in the blanks with their own lines. And that's kind of led to me this book, the success of this book, because I let some of the masters guide me with some of my language, and that really helped me out. So I think that to me, that's probably the most important aspect, is to have read a lot, to follow the people behind me, the people that I think of as teachers, and use that to kind of give me some basis every now and again. That doesn't answer the question though, does it?
That's a good start. Want to weigh in? Either of you, Caroline, I can see you.
Okay. It seems like when I write, I try to tell stories. I just sort of go into that space, imagine what was like back then. Or like I wrote about going to in China. I went to this city. It's a really old Kaifeng. It's a really old capital, and there we were told that underneath the city there are 7 dynasties buried down there. And that's just, we thought of my favorite poet is the Li Yu, and he was one of the he was a poet, and he was also a prince, and he was part of that buried down there. And so that poem I wrote about him is really speaking to him. That I really liked his poem, and it influenced me. So I just imagine what you think, having his remains like dug up and display and all that. I guess it's just imagination. It's just how I imagine it would be like for him.
Yeah, getting back to that. So now I was like, that's one of the reasons. Sometimes there's a fear in writing and a fear in poetry, and I get it myself all the time too, where how to get into a poem and one of the easiest ways is to be someone else. And so you adopt that mask, you put on a mask, you adopt the persona, you become somebody different, and that really frees up young writers and new writers. And it's freed me up in this collection too. So I really, really understand that speaker aspect, because I think most of my poems over the years have been me as the speaker. And that you struggle with, because you don't want to be the 21-year-old speaker. You don't want to be the 34-year-old, on my birthday and dealing with these things. You want to create a character. And I think that's just like in fiction, a really important thing to keep in mind when writing poetry. And that's how I've gotten through it. Trying to adopt a different persona.
But with both of you, James and Caroline, I hear you as the writer in the poetry. It doesn't read to me as though you're being a narrator or being a different person. I really do hear you telling your story there.
Oh, that's nice.
Nice.
Yeah, that's nice, because I didn't, in this collection, there's nothing personal about me, my own story, how I feel, or whatever, my own feelings and personal thing. This collection, I tried not to get into that, but it's interesting that Laurie said that I'm there in a way.
But you're the observer, I guess.
Yeah, but at the same time, Caroline, you also have those great poems, the animal poems, where you get into the thing. And I love that where the speaker is the fish, or where the school, the fish are not in the school and they're at a farm in China. And you make some really, really cool political statements in those animal poems with the pigs and the things. Those are fascinating. You've got a really cool aspect in there.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Laurie, do you want to say a couple of things about your sense of voice and speaker? And then we're going to take a couple of questions from our gathered folks.
I normally just really write as myself. I mean, each of my books has some poems where I'm writing about the stories of other people. But mostly it's about me all the time. So when I got to Mrs. Romanov, it was so freeing to actually write about somebody who wasn't me. It was really quite an exceptional experience, even though I was sort of in a certain way in the background pretending to be her. How would it feel to be this strangely cloistered person? So then I come to this book, and then I'm researching about ancestors and thinking about how they lived their lives. And I feel like a narrator in this book, even though I'm still actually quite actively there.
And it's a very precisely personal story that you are carrying too.
It is, but I didn't really feel like I was sort of trying to describe how his death affected me. I was wanting to describe how it affected him and us as a family. That's what I was thinking. Maybe that's not how it comes across, but
I think that's how it comes across. Yes. So you get the feel of elegy, but it's not. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about you. We're fascinated to walk with you.
I felt like I had a clipboard, through the whole thing, like taking my internal notes,
I feel like we're invited into your family mosaic in some ways, that
Yeah.
you actually, I was trying to think about how you've kind of stitched and woven things together in that, but you actually stitch and weave the reader into this mosaic. And the way you do that is just fascinating. And it's, I think it's the seasons, and I think it's because of the focus on life, but also death, but the seasons. And a long poem, your long poem works so beautifully in pieces and in pages. And every time you turn the page, you're opening up a new emotion. And I guess that's where I was, that opening up that grief case, that, but at the same time, a celebration. But I that word mosaic and how you stitch that together is just beautiful. It's, you're a master weaver. I'm sorry.
Well, you make it sound much more thoughtful than it might have been. It struck me as being more like a deck of cards that I was dealing out around a room, trying to figure out the best way to order the poems. You know, it was very basic to me.
Beautiful.
Well, we get to
Yeah,
see
it's really-
the thing once it's been woven, or once the deck of cards has been assembled. I think we have a couple of questions from the audience. Ashley, is that correct?
Yeah, we have a couple. So Catherine wants to know, she specifically was asking Lori, but I think everyone, if they could speak a little bit to how they decided on the title for their collection. So Lori was searching for Signal, James with Trailer, Caroline with Primal Sketches. Lori, do you want to answer first?
Yeah, searching for Signal. I remember back in the day when we were all starting to have cell phones for the first time, and the screen was always saying searching for Signal, because you know you're trying to use your phone, but the whole interface is kind of sketchy back then, and the phone was always saying searching for Signal. And then I just really, when my dad was sick and then when he was gone, it was like I just felt like I was searching out there, like sending out my own signals, you know. So almost sort of how people say that you feel a person watching you, but I was almost sort of like, you know, can you hear me? Like, are you getting this? You know, so really that's what it was.
That's beautiful. I like how I'll just barge in here for a second. I like how that sort of plays with the kind of planet/marble effect.
Yeah.
It's very intriguing, which also feels like that kind of what's in space right now.
Right. Yes. Coming up with a way of making Signal be a picture was quite an interesting challenge in terms of the cover. So I was quite happy with the outcome.
Yeah, it's stunning. James, do you want to talk about your title?
Yeah, the trailer won the CBC Poetry Prize in 2013. And I had added it to two different collections that I was working on, completely different collections. And I kind of made it either the sort of middle star or the later star of the collection. And then in 2019 in the summer, I was sitting in the actual trailer and I was thinking, oh, I had an epiphany. I'm as much of a trailer as the trailer. This trailer needs a big stage, a bigger stage, and needs its own collection. Darn it, the trailer. And so I started writing poems that summer and started collecting them and putting them together. Yeah. I never even thought of it. I was an idiot.
Busting cover that goes right along with that.
Oh, I know.
Busting off the page. I love that.
Yeah.
You said you're gonna, do you have any mustard on your lapel or anything, James?
Oh, for sure. I have mustard on every item of my clothing.
I did think often when I was reading the trailer, that suite of poems, I thought often how much the trailer was also about writing, also about constructing a self. There's a lot of analogy working there. It's really rich. It really works. It's very intriguing because it also feels like a trailer, you know.
Yeah, constructing, deconstructing all at the same time. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks, Charlene.
Yeah, no, I loved it. And Caroline.
Oh, actually, I had another title for it and I wasn't happy for it. So I was going through the collection and looking for ideas. And I noticed the word primal came up twice. And I said, oh, okay, primal something. And then primal sketches, that's how it is. It seems that all the poems has to do with something primal in us, yeah, and nature and all that. So I thought that was, yeah.
Really works. Also,
Yeah,
the title of the book goes with the image on the cover. I don't know if anyone
yeah, yeah.
the way you have this sort of beautiful delicacy and natural image at the very front with that flower, whatever that is, and a little hummingbird, and then this cityscape with a lot of pollution right behind. It's a very
I know.
interesting juxtaposition of that feels very much like the collection.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with the type that the design. Yes, yeah, it's really says a lot about the collection, like nature versus human progress and what we did, what we're doing to the planet, and this fragile balance between nature and industries and
Yeah, and Caroline, I really appreciated that in your collection about your comments about what was happening and what is happening in China and the natural environment and how that is changing so dramatically.
Yeah.
Really, really appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah. When I went back to China and I saw all these changes, I was looking for old things. When when you go back, because that's when I came when China was really way back before this explosion of modern things.
Yeah.
And I just keep looking so sad. All these things are gone, and China's changing. It's good in a way, but I just, for me to not to see those things again, it was really sad for me.
You can really feel that. You can
Yeah,
feel that.
yeah.
One more thing that came to me, Caroline, real quick,
Yeah.
about your collection is that not only landscape, but
Yeah.
you create soundscape in your poems too. Like that poem Footprints, like in there, just alliteration and the way you work with sound. So you've got landscape and soundscape happening. That's the other. And yeah, sorry, I can't compliment Lori and Caroline enough about their collections.
You make a good effort at it. So we have so much talking to do, but I think everyone's going to have to race out, get your hands on these books, because they will repay you, 100-fold. They're beautifully made, sensitively written, and just elegant in every way. And I love them.
But thank you so much, everyone, for coming this evening. Thank you to our lovely audience, to our poets, and to Charlene for hosting this evening. We had some technical issues earlier in the week, but I think that this was a wonderful evening celebrating some poetry, a perfect cap to National Poetry Month. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Goodbye.